Good morning, folks. You remember some time earlier, we have already referred to the idea that literary criticism could be divided into three major categories: historical criticism, theoretical criticism, as well as practical. So, in line with the division of chapters of the assigned book, today we are going to start chapter two, goes under the title A Historical Survey of Literary Criticism. And definitely it begins with a major Greek philosopher by the name of Plato. Let us look at the top of the page 19. There is an epigraph. I have no idea as to what you have already covered, whether or not you have already covered what is meant by an epigraph. There is a difference between an epigraph and an epigram. Epigraph is a line or a group that are selected by a certain author at below the title. And the selection is quite intentional. It stands as a reading directive. موجه قرائي. It helps the reader to find his way into the chapter or into the coming pages and so on and so forth. Reading directive is a term used or introduced by the German born American critic and theorist Wolfgang Iser. No idea as who Iser is, what he has written, and so on and so forth. Let us read the epigraph. As the epigram, a group of lines that are selected, which could be cited as an example to be followed. And when it is cited, nobody would ever question as to where it comes from. بذا قضت الأيام ما بين أهلها مصائب قوم. And epigrammatic line. And so is to be or not to be this question, whether it's nobler for the mind, Harold of outrageous fortune. So no poet, no artist has his or her complete meaning alone. This is quoted by the author from a very famous essay by the famous English poet and critic, T.S. Eliot. The essay, Tradition and Individual Talent. Definitely, and if somebody goes through this essay, he will come across a theory of poetry which has been proposed by T.S. Eliot in this essay, which develops into what is called impersonal theory of poetry. And you have no idea, and then I have no time to go through the essay in detail, but to contextualize the epigram, to set it into its proper context. The chief function of this quotation is to prepare you for what is to come. And the gist of the quotation has developed into what is nowadays called intertextuality, tenace. No poet, no artist has or her complete meaning alone. By the way, this essay has been already translated into Arabic and published in Al-Man, journal of Jordanian journal. هذه المقالة سبق وأن ترجمت إلى العربية ونشرت في مجلة المهد الأردنية. Someone is interested or keenly interested in the essay, he can have an access to it both in English and in Arabic. Well, to move on, we are introduced, or we are going to start with Plato. I'm quite certain that you have neither read something by Plato or nor on him. And this is the problem. Plato is a major Greek philosopher, and he has been adulated, that's to say, highly praised, because he is standing as some sort of founder of Greek philosophy. To cover his 24 dialogues takes us a lot of time. To cover, I mean, the comprehensive coverage of his dialogues will require more than a year or two. But we are not going to deal with Plato as a philosopher in as much as we are going to deal with the idea as to how far influential some of his philosophical ideas on the process of literary. And because you are students that have got no background whatsoever as far as philosophy is concerned, we are going to limit ourselves to certain ideas that are closely related to literary criticism. As I said, he is very much famous for 20 dialogues. That to go through these dialogues, a lot of time and much effort. And he is a philosopher that has covered every aspect down to the limiting of the age of the proper age to get married for women and men. I don't like to get you in detail as far as Plato is concerned, but I like to emphasize or to focus on the point that we are going to deal with Plato's formative influence on literary criticism. So that's why we are going to be very much in our exposition of certain ideas. So to repeat, we are not going to deal with Plato as a philosopher. Rather, we are going to deal or to cope with or to address some ideas that are highly influential in the evolution and development of literary criticism. Plato's ideas expressed in his Ionic Rita and Republic, Laws, and other works laid the foundation for many, if not most, of the pivotal issues of philosophy and literature. Through these dialogues, the basis is laid for not only philosophy, but also for literary criticism. And this could be recognized very, very easily through a quote by a British philosopher by the name of Alfred North Whitehead. A modern British philosopher once equipped, that is to say, he has put what he'd like to say in a very terse and laconic manner to quip that all of Western philosophy is but a footnote to what has already been written by other philosophers, you see, could amount to a footnote. So uh, the, the text is Platonic, and the footnotes is supposed to be forwarded by philosophers. You can gauge the influence, the instrumentality, and the comprehensiveness that is available and viable again in a Plato dialogue. Right. And other works laid the foundation for many, if not most, of the pivotal issues of philosophy and literature, including the concepts of truth, beauty, goodness, the nature of reality, the structure of society, the nature and relations of being, ontology, علم الكينونة, questions about how we know what we know, epistemology, علم المعرفة, and ethics, الأخلاق, morality. To cover these concepts, we are required to go through the whole bulk of Western philosophy. And this goes beyond whatever is available here. And after all, you have not been introduced to a course, even by the name of an introduction to philosophy. Those terms are comparatively very alien to you. Let us stick to what is available in front of us as far as this textbook is concerned. To give you an example, if somebody or one of you is interested in the relationship between reality and words, he has to read Gratalis. If somebody is interested in the development and evolution of the idea of innateness, which you have, I suppose, come across it through Chomsky's transformational grammar. Transformational grammar, you have to be aware of what Plato has already said in his dialogue Timaeus, and so on and so forth, as the other dialogues. Epistemology, again, this is a very major discipline, which tries to answer two questions: what we know and how we learn. كيف نعرف وماذا نعرف. And ethics and morality. Since Plato's days, such ideas have been debated, changed, debunked. Debunked means analyzed, or simply accepted, but none has been ignored. So this is the virtue of studying some ideas by Plato, and his ideas are still available up to the present time, debated, changed, analyzed, and so on and so forth. Let us continue. Plato's theories and the criticism, however, would be more clearly articulated, that is to say, would segmented. It's not pronounced as you have already come across the word in your course of phonetics and phonology, but here to articulate means to segment or to divide. كمفصلة في العربية. Somebody might raise the question, what is تمفصلة? That is to say, it's divided into segments. And this is your problem rather than mine. If you have any difficulty or a problem, try to look it up in your dictionary. You have to keep a dictionary, as I said, beside you when you read. Developed several hundred years later by the philosopher Plotinus. He is not Plato, but Plotinus, Plautine في العربية. And you know, he reintroduced Plato's ideas to the Western world. Any student who has studied Renaissance poetry should have some ideas about the influence of Plotinus on 16th century poetry. As a credit, we have got the idea of the one, واحد, and the theory of divine emanation, نظرية الفيض الإلهي. الفيض الإلهي. والفيض الإلهي يعني أن هناك واحد أحد يمكن الوصول إلى وجوده عبر تجلياته في مخلوقاته. I don't like to get you on these ideas. And after all, Neoplatonism, and this is the philosophical doctrine that has been advocated by Plotinus, الأفلاطونية الجديدة. Up to now, there are some people who are labeled as Neoplatonists, الأفلاطونية الوجودة في العالم. And he has exercised a very strong influence on the Arab Sufi. يعني المتصوف العرب، القشيري، ابن سينا, Rabbi al-Hanawi, and so on and so forth. I don't like to get you involved in this because this is beyond your own understanding. So you can recognize that there is a difference between Sufism among the Arabs or in Arab culture and mysticism. التصوف الأجنبي أو الغربي يختلف عن الصوفية العربية. Why? Because the source is comparatively different. The source is comparatively different. And after all, in every religion, there is a mystic aspect, which might develop into further categories. So now, having a very quick idea as far as Plato is concerned, the basic point in this is that we are going to look upon Plato in terms of how he has understood the creative process, or how literature comes into كيف يتشكل الأدب، كيف فهم أفلاطون عملية الإبداع. No writer, no poet there is who has no as what the creative process is concerned. Be he a psychologist, You see, logically oriented. That's to say, he follows Freud. Freud, the, the famous German psychoanalyst, has written an essay called Writers and Daydreaming. يعني واحدة من الموضوعات الشائكة في الأدب والنقد هي كيف يتشكل الأدب وما يصطلح عليه بعملية الإبداع. لا شاعر لا كاتب في العالم يمكن أن يحظى بقبول الناس أو يستأثر باهتمامهم ما لم يمتلكوا فكرة واضحة عن كيفية تشكل الأدب. كيف يكتب؟ ما هي الدوافع التي تقوده لكتابة ما يكتبه؟ يعني لابد له من فهم خاص للأسس النفسية للإبداع. فكرة أن هناك كتاب مصطفى سويف المصري نشر ب 53 الأسس النفسية للإبداع وتحديدا في الشعر، وحصل عليه على جائزة الدولة التقديرية. ناهيك عن أن فرويد الذي يشكل بكتابات المهاد كثير يعني العديد من الدراسات التي اقتربت أو قاربت الأدب مقاربة نفسية، تحديدا في مقاتل مشهورة الكتاب وأحلام. هذا يعني أن هناك مقاربة تعرف بالمقاربة النفسية للأدب، ليس فقط يعني فرويد وإنما بتلاميذ أدلر يونغ. وهناك مجموعة من علماء النفس الذين زاوجوا بين الفلسفة وعلم النفس، على رأسهم يأتي الألمان. تلاميذ ستومر يعني الذين تأثروا بنظرية فرويد في الخمسينات هو عالم النفس الذي شق على أستاذه وعلى مدرسة التحليل النفسي الفرنسي. والمكان ليس لا المكان ولا الزمان مواتي للخوض في غمار وتفاصيل هذا البحر المتلاطم من الأسماء والأفكار والمصطلحات. So, in other words, let us stick to what is available and what is handy and accessible to you at this particular stage of your life and at this particular stage in your studying. Yeah. And that's the way, you see, we have to follow it. This is the problem with literary criticism. It's not available on the page, but it has got its own ramifications. Yes. So, the first point that we are going to deal with as far as Plato is concerned is that how Plato used process. Even Wordsworth has got his own understanding of what makes poetry into poetry. And I suppose you have already come across his own definition of poetry. It is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin in emotion, recollected in quality. The term is an outgrowth or a production of such poet. So this is the close relationship. Poet produces such kind of, and so is true. Stone could be marked and restored because it is produced. Well, the problem is that you quite often you study poetry, however limited your study is, without its own theory. Every poet has got his own understanding of the process. Shelley, for example, he says, "When my mind boils over with images, what is left is just skim them off, and after all, I am left on with a fading pole." Madawi. This is the English romantic poet Shelley. Some other poets said, writing poetry, I usually write poetry. Third leg, which is my pen. So there are so many understandings of what makes poetry. Poetry. In other words, every poet who deserves the name, because we have got poets, versifiers, and poetasters. شاعر وشاعر حتى في التقسيم العربية شاعر الفحل لا، هذه المفردة يجب أن لا تفهم بالمعنى البيولوجي. إذا أردت أن تعرف أو تقف على مديات هذا المفهوم بالتراث العربي فعليك مراجعة رسالة الدكتوراه أدونيس. That is if you are. Okay. So now, how literature comes into being, which we are going to deal with. Second is it's notably clear and well and internationally publicized. Plato is one of those who stood against, who rejected poets and poetry because he is morally oriented. من الشعراء. Okay, so he is morally. So we are going to have some ideas as to why Plato stood against poetry, why he has rejected poetry and poets. Is his rejection an overall rejection, or he has certain exclusions, certain exceptions for a certain category of poets? So that's why. Um, by the way, if somebody tries to follow up the line of those who rejected poets, there are certain philosophers, beginning with Catullus, the Roman. You see, the Cartesian philosophy has got no place for poets. They are all inspired, supposedly, by Plato. Plato is well established of, of poetry and poets. There is also a writer by the name of Thomas Love Peacock, who has written a book under the title Before Ages of Poetry. Again, I'm referring you throughout these books, you see, hoping that one day, if somebody is keenly interested, can look at them, have a look, or stumble through these books, but they are very essential for someone who tries to follow up the evolution and development of poetry right from the very beginning of the modern times. We have got two camps, Akamuaskaran, those who stand for poetry, defending it, and on the other side, or on the other hand, we have got those who stood poetry. We've got is an apology for poetry, defense of poetry by Sidney, poetry by Shelley in 1823. Apart from those who rejected, beginning with Catullus, Roman, Cartesian philosophy. Okay? And Cartesian philosophy عن الفلسفة الديكارتية للفيلسوف الفرنسي, who is very much famous for his book for method مقالة في المنهج الفرنسي, متاح ومعروف للقراء العرب عبر ترجمة لمجموعة من كتبه يأتي في المنهج discourse on method. Shows you how to argue, how to abide by certain principles, and thereby you come out with and dealing with things. So apart from all other ideas as far as truth or related to language and language and reality and so on and so forth, we are going to limit ourselves studying these two basic points. Process, that is to say, how Plato understands how literature comes on being, which I have already referred to in Arabic. By the way, Plato believes what is called essences or ideals, يعني الماهيات أو المثل. In other words, reality consists of individual things, or individual ideas, and the available things are merely an imitation. It is only credit, you see, the theory of imitation or mimesis. يعني يرجع للفضل في تأسيس نظرية المحاكاة من أن هناك عالم مثول والواقع الذي نعيش به وتعامل معه ما هو إلا انعكاس أو محاكاة لعالم. In other words, there is a primary world and the secondary world. So the primary world is the individual things that we usually deal with, and the second world is the world that a man of letters, or that's to say, a writer who creates and reflects. But the question that arises here, does literature reflect reality or reflect on reality? A philosophical problem that takes a lot of time and needs a lot of effort to debunk, to analyze, and this is the idea. Now, Plato is a theorist who stands for mimesis. By the way, the poetry that you've studied in the third year could be labeled or described as mimetic poetry, a poetry that tries to bring in the outside reality into the poetic. يعني هو شعر يسعى لجلب الخارج إلى داخل النص. That's why it's called mimetic. Dryden, for example, Pope. That's why Pope in his essay in criticism touches upon the idea that, themes, ideas are there, but they are not well expressed. Right. Okay. So this is Acts. And he introduces this is, the idea that a poet, according to Plato, could not produce his own poetry unless he is inspired by one of the muses. لا يمكن للشاعر أن يكتب شعره ما لم أن يوحى إليه من أحد الفنون. وربات الفنون في الفكر اليوناني هم 9. They are 9 muses. مو ربات البيوت وإنما ربات الفنون. So in other words, a poet, as I said, could not. So in other words, Plato is behind the theory of inspiration. The question that raises itself here: could an inspired be available all the times? Places يمكن للإلهام يعني يوجد كل الأماكن كل الأوقات. So, in other words, the poet is comparatively passive, سلبي. يتلقى ما يلهم إليه وبالتالي ينطلق شعرا. He is very passive in the sense that he works as a conveyor, ناقل. He is inspired with to his readers or listeners. Again, an idea that we have to have in mind is that, what role does the poet play? Is merely a conveyor? Plato, again, is of the idea that, the poet acts or works as a mediator, وسيط, to convey what he is inspired with by the muses to his own audience. Moreover, he says that he occupies a midway position, يعني يحتل موقعا وسطا between a madman and the language he speaks completely different from other people. It is a production or an outgrowth of frenzy, يعني نوبة. Yeah, the poet, in terms of Plato's philosophy, is that he could be either a madman, مجنون, or he could be a prophet. يعني ممكن أن يكون نبيا وممكن أن يكون مجنونا. على فكرة الجنون في الأدب جبران كتب الموضوع، وكثير من الناس الذين باهتمامهم موضوع ابتداها أفلاطون. وهناك كتاب لامرأة لبنانية عنوان أدبنا العربي، مرأة اسمها ريتا عوضة. Interested, he can go back to the book and he or she will find an exposition of madness. It's beginning with the Plato, going through Gibran Khalil Gibran, and touching on Nietzsche, the German philosopher, الفيلسوف الألماني الذي في أواخر حياته ومشهور في كتاب هكذا. For those who are interested to have a solid background, not understand literary criticism properly unless you have an equal solid background in philosophy, adjacent disciplines, sociology, psychology, economics. That is, in other words, the creative process, according to Plato, is comparatively irrational. He could not control it. It comes all of a sudden. من الطريف أن نذكر أنه عملية الإبداع على وفق الفهم الأفلاطوني يقابلها الفهم العربي هو أن الشاعر لا يمكن أن ينتج شعره إلا بعد أن يوحى إليه في وادي عبقر. فهناك فهم متقارب هذا. But these two theories, whether it is the Arabic or the Greek, is virtually primitive. يعني فهم بدائي لعملية الإبداع. Simply because the creative process of how literature comes into being virtually very sophisticated. Very sophisticated. That's why serious in nature and so much scholarly efforts have been expended, you see, just to iron out the riddles, to iron out and يفك مغاليق. وكل المحاولات التي سعت إلى فك مغاليق عملية الإبداع they are aborted. يعني هي مجهضة. It is some sort of preconceptions. يعني فهم مسبق لعملية الإبداع. إذا ما سألت امرأة ما هي مشاعرك أثناء عملية الولادة، هي مرحلة لاحقة. This is the point. This is the point. يعني على قول السياب طلق ولا ميلاد. This is the point. This is the point which I'd like you to have here. Let us say, while condemning poets for producing art that is nothing more than a copy of a copy. لأن الأدب ما هو إلا نسخة لنسخة، لأن النسخة الأصلية هي المثل والماهيات. المثال أنه لو هناك كرسي في الواقع وهناك فكرة الكرسي، الكرسي في الواقع ما هو إلا نسخة لفكرة الكرسي. حين يأتي فنان ويرسم كرسيا، فهذه اللوحة لوحة الكرسي ما هي محاكاة إلى محاكاة، وبالتالي فإن الفن المتمثل في الكرسي ابتعد مرحلتين، ولهذا فهو أقل منزلة. هكذا يذهب التفكير الأفلاطوني في تفكير عملية. I'm speaking Arabic just to make you understand. لأن الفن، وهذا موقف يعني مناهض وينطوي على انتقاص للفن، للعمل الفني، للعمل الفني. Definitely, these ideas by Plato are not going to stay as they are. They are going to be subjected to a very meticulous and scrupulous refutation. هذه الأفكار ستفنن لاحقا على يد آخرين، وتحديدا على يد أرسطو. ليش؟ في مرحلة لاحقة سنتعرض إلى الفيلسوف اليوناني. Never call him Aristo. I have already come across such kind of writing by papers handed in to me by students. Aristo. He is not Aristo, he is Aristotle. And again, I suppose that you have already come across some of the Aristotelian ideas when you have studied Shakespearean drama, because he has got his own peculiar understanding of what the tragedy is supposed to be, how he has defined it, what are the basic factors in a tragedy, the elements of a tragedy, what's meant by tragic flow, tragedy, and what is meant, how it works, on theory as far as theory للنص المسرحي, ideas that we are going to deal with coming lectures, hopefully. That's enough for today. No, it's quite tough to listen to assimilate them and so forth.